that info. Dr. Rima, is there anything you want to add before I hand it over to our guests?
I just want to say thank you, Soror. I mean, it always shows up. The Crimson and Cream always comes through like a dream. So I just appreciate you showing up, your fabulous Soror self. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for having me. So I'm going to start sharing my PowerPoint and get into this. All right. Are we seeing everything okay?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So I just want to begin by thanking you all so much for the introduction. Thank you, Dr. B, for helping to spread the word about this talk and enshrining me with a new name on LinkedIn. I've never been called the legendary mother of the House of Higher Education, but I'm going to take it. And thank you, Dr. Rima. Thank you, Soror. I really appreciate having the opportunity to be here with you all. And I consider it an honor to be speaking with you. The title of my talk is When and Where We Enter, Modeling Black Feminist Possibilities for Black Children. And I chose this direction for a few reasons that I want to share with you. The first, and I'm trying to click here. Okay. So the first deals with my own mother and the legacy that she left. And I want to allow some space to just use this talk and my engagement with you to be one of a little bit of vulnerability. So when I was invited to give the talk, I was considering whether or not I'd actually have the time and capacity to prepare because at the time I was managing my work life, my family, my spouse, alongside being a caregiver for my mother. And so what that meant was I was traveling back and forth to St. Louis to be with my mother and to provide support to my sisters. And I decided to do the talk given the emphasis on Black children and my own reflections on my mother as she faced an imminent transition. And so for the last several months, I have been thinking a lot about what my mother meant to me and her continued significance in my life from my girlhood to womanhood. And in all of those reflections, what keeps ringing true for me is that my mother embodied Black feminism and she modeled Black feminism and taught my sisters and me Black feminist ways of knowing. And so my mother faced some significant impossibilities during her own adolescence, having lost her parents at a young age. And as a child growing up, I had opportunities to listen in on, family stories and their backgrounds. But as I grew older, I really wanted to capture some of the stories from my mother's perspective. And so I interviewed her about 3 years ago and asked her to share her life story with me. And this was particularly important because I carry her stories with me and I wanted to share her story with my children. And so I want my mother to be remembered. I recall her discussing the challenges her mother faced and the adversity my grandmother endured after my grandfather had been killed in a workplace incident. And so although my grandmother was a clear beneficiary, she didn't receive any money following his death. And so she was raising my mother and her siblings on a seamstress income. And so from listening to my mother, I learned about what it meant to face disenfranchisement, significant loss, given that her mother died during her early adolescence, and the reliance she had on her eldest siblings, particularly my aunt, who is now 92 years old, to survive. So during my mother's homegoing service in early April, things I had already known about her were made especially vivid to me as I listened to the various tributes. She was the first in her family to earn a college degree and later a master's degree. She was fortunate to have her initial training at Homer G. Phillips School of Nursing, and she would go on to accomplish so much as a leader in the field of nursing. And most vivid to me are the lessons she imparted on my sisters and me about loving one another, respecting elders and adults, exhibiting self-respect, establishing a spiritual foundation, practicing unwavering integrity, and being of service by extending time and resources to others, and fearlessly navigating this world as Black women. My mother was my first model of Black feminist possibility, and through her, I'm able to be here with you and reflect on how her Black mama praxis, alongside so many other Black feminists within and beyond the Academy, have been and continue to be the guideposts we should be referring to as we care for and center the needs of Black women and Black mothers, and center the needs of Black children. And these are just some pictures of my mother. Um, Another reason I took this direction was just having the opportunity recently to celebrate my first Mother's Day without my mother's physical presence. And though I know well that her spiritual presence will always be with me constantly, there's going to be several other, first holidays I'll face without my mother. But there was something about this Mother's Day that didn't sit right with me in the context of why we celebrate. So I don't know how many of you know, but 2024 marked the 110th Mother's Day in the US. And of course, it's a day intended to celebrate mothers and the care they give their children, but it fell sour to me, at least philosophically. So Anna Jarvis, the founder and champion of Mother's Day, she really wanted it to be recognized as a national holiday, but ultimately distanced herself from Mother's Day because she felt like it became so commercialized rather than being about the real work that mothers were contributing. And so whether through cards, phone calls, or flowers, mothers want and deserve to be celebrated and appreciated, but I think deeply about Black women who have historically been denied opportunities to be mothers. And in our present context, the desire to mother is marred by gross health inequities in Black women's maternal well-being. And if we consider the current state of reproductive rights, I find it difficult to celebrate Mother's Day in the midst of a concerted effort to deny women, particularly Black women and women of color, broadly speaking, the right to govern what we can or can't do with our bodies, and then shame women who either are not or have no desire to biologically mother. So on one hand, to celebrate Mother's Day, but also commodify the day as well as deny or stifle the process of mothering is really maddening to me. So I'm thinking deeply about mothering and how I've been mothered and how I mothered. I'm reflecting on how we make sense of mothering and how Black feminism helps us to translate these ideas for the purpose of loving, caring, and centering Black children. And so I'm pondering questions like, what role does Black feminism play in making sense of it all? What does Black feminism contribute to how our children imagine, dream, and realize possibility? And what are the barriers or challenges designed to stifle or construct Black mothers as impossibilities? So, a starting point for answering these questions, I think, lies in how we define Black feminism and constructions and notions of mothering. So, a host of Black women scholars have laid out frameworks for what Black feminism is and what purpose it serves, not just for understanding how Black women navigate this world, but also the systems and structures that make navigating particularly daunting at times. And across all of these writings, the contours of Black feminism suggests that we're attending to how Black women construct knowledges and the fact that these knowledges are legitimate and consequential to our lives and the lives of our children and others for whom we care. That centering the lives, voices, and experiences of Black women should be a normal exercise rather than an exceptional one. That Black feminism acknowledges the very necessary and real responsibility to make Black women's needs, concerns, perspectives, and desires central to Black lives and the nation. And Black feminism isn't simply relegated to a moment, which is so often the case, but it is an entire movement. It's concerned with naming the realities and truth of Black womanhood, and it requires a telling of and reckoning with histories that have existed for centuries, but have been and continue to be refused because of the discomfort they engender for those upholding a white heterosis patriarchal agenda. It involves attending to the intersections of race, class, and gender, and the unique circumstances through which Black women have to traverse in an effort to simply exist. And beyond existing, the lengths through which we go to experience joy, love, motherhood, sisterhood, and womanhood as whole humans. And so at the surface, these ideas don't sound particularly hard and they make perfect sense. So why would we not all do these things? Why wouldn't we embrace a framework that promises clarity on Black women's lives and that helps us to better understand Black women and by extension, Black mothers? But if we're being honest, even the simplest ideas when it comes to us are positioned as challenging or impossible, right? Whenever we're attempting to center Black women's lives because we're not deemed worthy of mattering. So, in effect, such logics are designed to make our lives impossible. So, I want to approach this talk from a standpoint that illuminates Black women's contributions and the plight of Black mothering through a Black feminist lens. Black mothers are already doing the work necessary to take care of and love Black children. But my question is, who is taking care of Black women and Black mothers? Even if she hasn't given birth, many Black women are always already mothering in some capacity, but what are the supports available to sustain her? So, in preparing for this talk and many others, I always consider it an honor to be able to speak about and reflect about Black women, to be mothered by a Black woman, and to be a Black mother. And interestingly, I grew up and was educated in schools where I was fortunate as a child to have Black women educators and to be exposed to a curriculum where Black people were acknowledged and celebrated. But what I find fascinating is that while I learned the accomplishments of women like Sojourner Truth, it was often secondary in nature. I learned more about Black men, which meant Black women were secondary. And I also learned about these women's contributions, but their praxis of mothering rarely took center stage. And so it wouldn't be until graduate school where I was exposed to language that now allows me to make sense of this phenomenon. So, for example, the late Bell Hooks noted, whenever I ask students to name intellectuals without requesting they be gender specific, and I'm quoting her, they invariably name Black men: Du Bois, Delaney, Garvey, Malcolm X, and even contemporary folks like Cornel West and Henry Louis Gates are mentioned. If I request that they be gender specific, they readily name these Black men and hesitate as they mentally search for the names of Black women. After much pause, they begin to call out the names of famous contemporary Black women writers, usually Alice Walker or Toni Morrison. Now and then, Angela Davis's name appears on the list. They do not know the work of 19th century Black women intellectuals. Black women who would be perfect counterparts to Du Bois and Delaney are not known. The names of Anna Julia Cooper, Mary Church Terrell, and even the more widely circulated name of Ida B. Wells are not on the tip of everybody's tongue. Sexist subordination in Black intellectual life continues to obscure and devalue the work of Black female intellectuals. This is why it's so difficult for students to name us. And so in Brittany Cooper's book, Beyond Respectability, she also notes how Black women literally had to fight to be called intellectuals. And she, in her book, she talks about this article in Ebony magazine that positioned Black women intellectuals as a problem, and how Gwendolyn Brooks was interviewed for the article, but never positioned herself as an intellectual and alluded an intellectual as anything but a Black woman. So, according to Brooks, Black women could be brilliant, creative, they could be eminent, right? But to be called intellectual is quote unquote something else. And so what I love about this idea of something else is how Cooper removes the sting from the idea that Black women can't be intellectuals by reframing what something else means. So she delves into our Black communal language where we might say, girl, you something else, right? My mother used to say that to me a lot, right? And so what Cooper states is that to be an intellectual is to be something else. Black women are something else. It is that space of possibility, that unique Black women's cultural conceptualization of the something else as a form of energized, audacious, vivifying engagement with the world that can, if we let it, animate conceptions of Black women intellectuals. So to be honest, had I been in Hooks's classroom, I would have been one of those students having a difficult time naming Black women intellectuals. And had there been an even more specific discussion about mothering praxis, the experience would have been that much more challenging because of how Black women's lives are positioned in the curriculum across the P20 landscape as not mattering. And so my larger point here is that the absence of mattering creates structures of impossibility and stifles possibility where Black women's lives are concerned. And that's why the title of this talk is inspired by Anna Julia Cooper, who really eloquently pushed back against this impossibility. So in her A Voice from the South, she wasn't simply saying when and where I enter as a tagline, right? Instead, she was purposefully pushing back against a narrative of impossibility. In the book, she explains, the late Martin Delany, who was an unadulterated Black man, used to say when honors of state fell upon him that when he entered the Council of Kings, the Black race entered with him. Only the Black woman can say when and where I enter in the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood without violence and without suing or special patronage. Then and there, the whole Negro race enters with me. So here again, I want to remind us that for centuries, Black women have shaped, constructed, and molded the contours of mothering children. Their own strength, their own and through force, so mothering their children and through force other people's children. So how we understand the success of Black children has to directly link to the success of Black women and Black mothers. So now that I've kind of talked through some general ideas related to Black feminism, I want to use it as a backdrop to think about and theorize both impossibilities and possibility models. And I've always loved the power of theory, especially in terms of expanding and pushing boundaries or considering new and different ways that can inform our collective sense making around various experiences. So I rely on theory, given the view that theory helps with sense making, right? And we need to theorize because without substantive theories and frameworks, we end up with these multiple ideas about Black women without addressing the particularity of their lives for possibility. And without theory, we're less likely to engage beyond conventional wisdom and thinking where Black women are concerned. So first, how might we theorize how Black women and Black mothers have been positioned as impossibilities, and what themes comprise a theory of impossibility? So for me, I want to talk about a couple of themes. One is this idea of setting the table without a seat. So in 2021, I had the honor of giving the 18th annual Brown v. Board of Education lecture for AERA. And in that talk, I referenced some of the missing narratives from the larger discourse of Brown. One of those missing narratives, of course, centered on the role of Black girls and women. And I talked about how, we know Thurgood Marshall, we know Charles Hamilton Houston, but we keep missing Black women and girls because we're not socialized to see them as powerful actors, right? And so they go unnoticed. And we don't focus on Linda Brown and her mother, Darlene, who were plaintiffs in Brown. We miss Gladys Hedgepeth and Berlene Williams, Those were mothers who brought cases after their children were denied access to a local school. And we miss Marguerite Daisy Carr, Doris Fay, and Doris Ray. We miss Barbara Johns, Arthur and Lucy, right? All of these girls, right, who were young and laying the groundwork for equitable educational access. So they were literally setting a table without a seat. So when we consider this idea of impossibility for Black women and girls, it wasn't merely about educational opportunity. That was, of course, a part of the process, but they were setting a table at which they had no seat. And the other aspect of their work was about the possibility of being treated with humanity, to not only be seen as women and girls, which was too far-fetched, but also to be seen as human. So they were confronting impossibility on two fronts. And so my intent with this theme is to illustrate how simple it is to not only erase Black women's history, but to make their contributions, in a word, impossible. Another way we might think about this impossibility refers to the ways Black women are subjected to erasure in educational, political, and social institutions. So this erasure prevents Black women from being seen or from experiencing trauma or pain. In other words, Black women become victimless. So I recently had an opportunity to read America Goddamn, which is a book written by my OSU colleague, Treva Lindsay. And in the book, she talks about example after example of Black women, some of whom are mothers, who are either poor or disabled, and how each of them lost their lives. And in each scenario, these women were in need of care and deserving of just simple regard, but their humanity was too impossible to recognize. And so people who should have been caring for them, whether it be a police officer or a medical staff or a social worker, you name it, none of them were held accountable. And as a result, no one killed these women and no one took their lives. And so no one left their children without mothers, and no one had stolen away sisters, wives, and best friends. Instead, many of them were blamed for their predicament and ultimately responsible for their own deaths. So this phenomenon doesn't begin at womanhood. Black girls are often captured in the cycle of nobodiness during childhood and adolescence. Monique Morris created a documentary on the phenomenon of push out in reference to policies and practices in schools that are both punitive and exclusionary, resulting in Black girls dropping out, being expelled, and unable to access resources that will otherwise support their educational trajectories. Because push out is so systemic, it's difficult to point to a specific actor targeting Black girls. So no one is targeting Black girls. And not only is their Black girl stolen, but in many instances, systemic factors prevent Black women from opportunities to be mothers. To be the mothers that Black girls need, creating a cycle of impossibilities. Black girls should be able to enjoy the process of schooling and be able to engage in their passions without feeling dehumanized or marginalized and subjected to erasure. So, are Black girls actually being forced out? And if so, who's pushing them out? The fact that no one is at fault for the unjust ways they're treated is a manifestation of impossibility politics. It is completely possible to be a Black girl and later a woman and ultimately a mother who is subjected to push out with little to no recourse, because it's oftentimes impossible to see us as at minimum worthy enough to be in particular roles or spaces and worthy of protection and regard. Another theme of impossibility is this idea of legislating our bodies, and it connects to historical legacies and present day politics surrounding Black women's bodies and the extent to which our bodies are legislated and our capacity to mother is prohibited. So in our present context, attempts to legislate our bodies occurs through policies and processes designed to shame us for doing things like wearing natural hairstyles or presenting ourselves in any way that does not conform to European beauty standards. So to me, it meant something when Representative Jasmine Crockett, who as a Black woman is verbally attacked in the workplace for wearing eyelash enhancements, right? And the suggestion that such enhancements limited her intellectual capacity. There is nothing inherently wrong with enhancing one's beauty, but when Black women do it, it can be easily used as a way to demean her, regardless of the context. And so, in this sense, the unwritten rules surrounding beauty are used to shame Black women. But even beyond this, Black women are in a fight for reproductive justice, particularly our deservingness of equitable maternal health care. Black women are more likely to experience pregnancy related trauma and complications, and our pain is regularly dismissed. Additionally, we don't have the luxury of worrying only about the process of childbearing. We also have to think about all the services and supports necessary to live, whether it be physical and mental health care, employment, access to nutritional food, reliable transportation. The reality is we don't have systems in place that are designed to support Black women, which makes mothering an impossibility. Dr. Jamila Taylor, who currently leads the Institute of Women's Policy Research, issued a statement during the 2024 National Black Maternal Health Week, and she stated the shameful truth is that ongoing structural racism plays a central role in the deaths of Black women. Biases within the medical profession still shape the care Black women receive or don't receive during pregnancy, and often with tragic consequences. This is true for all Black women, regardless of their income levels or where they come from. And so when I hear that, what that means is that this PhD won't save me when I'm trying to have a child, right? It doesn't mean anything. She goes further to say the situation is even scarier for Black women in states that restrict access to abortion and reproductive health services, and where women are 62% more likely to die due to pregnancy related complications. But statistics don't fully capture the tragic loss and human toll the Black maternal health crisis takes on families and children. Pregnancy should be a time filled with joy and celebration, but Black mothers are too often fearing and fighting for their lives when giving birth. And she talks about this situation basically as a societal failure that needs immediate attention. These efforts to legislate Black women's bodies are timeless, right? There are tons of examples, but Brenda Stevenson explains a 1643 measure, right? This is in 1600s, right? Where the Virginia General Assembly made Black girls who were 16 and older tithable commodities. And it made their expected workload equal to Black men, which ultimately robbed them of any access to femininity. And she shared how the workload, quote, damaged women's health, prenatal care, and the amount of attention they could give their dependent kin. And this othering of Black women in colonial American society was foundational in the assault on Black femininity, masculinity, the Black family, and the sociocultural roles of Black adults. And so we know the period of enslavement mapped the course for Black women's continued dehumanization and exploitation and rape, having been forced to bear children but not allowed to be mothers, being forced into submission but unrapeable, or as Angela Davis notes, Black women were genderless. Patricia Hill Collins reminds us that Black women were those deemed unfit to be quote unquote real mothers, which is why we're subjected to policies that fuel reproductive injustices. And so this last theme of impossibility is around mules and maids, right? And it resonates directly with Zora Neale Hurston's book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, where she talks about where her main character, Janie, talks about the load that Black women are expected to bear as mules of the world. And so this notion of a mule carries with it both symbolic and literal connotations. Symbolically, Black women's work is burdened with the heavy load that sits at the nexus of racism, sexism, classism, and numerous other forms of oppression. Janie's use of the mule metaphor points to a dehumanization of women where their work is primarily about serving others, never being recognized for their contributions, and the overall expectation that they engage in this work without complaint. So Black women's work extends beyond paid labor, and it's also characterized by unpaid labor in their homes and oftentimes the homes of others, and the labor required toward continued uplift of Black people. So Black women's work is oftentimes a thankless form of labor. So another, and anybody who's heard me talk, I read a lot and incorporate it into my talks, but a couple of years ago I read Never Caught, the Washington's relentless pursuit of their runaway slave owner Judge. And so in the book by Erica Armstrong Dunbar, she talks about Ona, who was born into slavery, but she was a talented seamstress for the Washington family, and she was Martha Washington's personal maid, but she eventually managed to escape, and in doing so built a life where she was both a wife and a mother. But they kept searching for her for years, right? And they couldn't understand why she would escape. Martha Washington had lost her personal maid, and both her and George believed they treated her like family and not a slave. So why would she leave? And that story always resonates because when Black women leave a situation, or rather escape, it's because we've been devalued and working in spaces with people who simply don't get it or can't imagine the possibility of us. And so, from their standpoint, we should just be happy and stop complaining. However, to be a Black woman or to be from any minoritized group is also to know your worth and to understand that sometimes the assignment is to leave. So the Washingtons knew Ona's value, but the only possibility they saw in her was as a slave. And rather than a free woman capable of making her own decisions, it was impossible to see her as independent and agentic. I'm also reminded here of Deborah Harley's article about maids in academia, where she details the inordinate amount of labor that Black women perform in educational spaces. So not only are Black women the maids, they're also the work mules expected to advocate for Black issues, be translators of Black culture, be navigators of patriarchal and racial minefields, the community liaison, and conduits for other people's problems. So I could talk at length about Black women, but my hope is that this litany of examples gives a sense of what it means to occupy a Black body and to navigate that body and lean into the humanity that that body represents, while simultaneously being told that the very thought of you is impossible, or the material realities of you are impossible, that your contributions might matter, but you don't. So I wanted you to see how this predicament acts to prohibit Black women and by extension, Black mothering in a more expansive, critical, and liberating way. And across all of these examples, I've highlighted through a lens of impossibility how Black women, Black mothers, and Black girls often get overlooked, not due to any limitations of their own, but instead due to the limitations of society that refused and still refuses to see them or to see us. And that Black women have managed to push back and resist structures of impossibilities, of course, is amazing and reminiscent of Nannie Helen Burroughs, her motto, who that we specialize in the wholly impossible. And some might even argue that it's magic, but if Black women are so magic, then we have to ask, why aren't more people emulating us? And so I think it's easy to take a celebratory high road with the notion of Black girl magic, but oftentimes people forget about Black women's labor and sacrifices, and they forget the work that goes into creating and manifesting possibilities. And it rarely occurs that many Black women succumb while grappling with and navigating the waters of impossibility designed to drown us. So I theorize impossibilities, but I also want to consider theorizing possibilities. And I think that requires critical consciousness on our part and an awareness of the world around us. And it requires that we delineate what we know from what we think we know, right? And so theorizing possibilities requires us to push back against this narrative war that's designed to stifle imagination and new possibilities. And we're currently fighting a narrative war right now against people who want to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion, villainize critical race theory, erase Black history, which is women's history, Latino history, Indigenous history, and the list goes on. And so the information I'm sharing today could be misrepresented as divisive because it doesn't squarely focus on white people. And so that's, extremely troubling. But I want us to think about one possibility of Black feminist mother work And Patricia Hill Collins offers a starting point for possibility through her own theorization of mother work. She talks about mother work as the labor women of color extend beyond caring for their own children to also include other people's children. And she states mother work recognizes that individual survival, empowerment, and identity require group survival, empowerment, and identity. And so she insists on these three ideas, right? Physical survival, maternal empowerment, and racial identity. These are the things that we need both for individually, right, as mothers, but also for our communities. And so this is where I want to take us back to the central premise of this talk, and what she says about about mother work. She says, without women's mother work, communities would not survive, and by definition, women of color themselves would not survive. So again, this idea of when and where we enter. And so if we take Collins' notion of mother work seriously, particularly the role of physical survival, power, and identity, it becomes an incredibly helpful guide for expanding notions of motherhood and notions of mother work praxis. So we might think about mother work as activism. And, I always think the civil rights movement is filled with these examples of mother work praxis, particularly how it occurs through activism. We could talk about Daisy Bates being the central figure in the Little Rock Nine. Ernest Green talks about her as a poster child of Black resistance and her role in recruiting these students, working with their parents, using her home as a headquarters, and suffering the attacks alongside the parents of these students and the students themselves. We could talk about Ella Baker, who was also a central figure, and her role in the NAACP, but never really receiving the accolades she deserves. And she was most central in encouraging students to start the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and giving of her own money to help college students, right? Not encourage them to join the SCLC, but to do their own thing, right? And encouraging other people to give money to support SNCC. And so rather than taking over, she embodied a mother work practice and by extending her networks and resources to the students. We could talk about mother work as an intersectional intervention and think about the work of Lucy Diggs Slow, who was the first Black Dean of Women at Howard University. And now she did not have children, right? But in her work as the Dean of Women, she really believed in the possibility of these college students. And so she hosted hosted programs. She focused on self-determination and, pushed them to be leaders and wanted them to do work beyond, being teachers and nurses. She wanted them to explore all kinds of careers. And she was so revered that other deans of women would contact her to get ideas for how they could work with students at their own institutions, right? And she was never paid equitably and was often outspoken about pay disparities, but she wanted to model possibilities by serving women across college campuses. In a more contemporary context, mother work also shows up in our mentoring relationship. So I think about your mentor. I'm thinking about my mentor, Dr. Mary Howard Hamilton, who saw me and nurtured me and guided me through my doctoral studies. And I met her when I was visiting an institution for my master's degree. She was the only other Black woman in the room cheering for me. She didn't even know me. But that same day, she spoke possibilities into me that I hadn't even developed or constructed at the time. And so I want you to think about the person who treats you like family, who's genuinely committed to your success. This is what the mother work looks like. And it's about what Black children need. They need affirming and loving people who are invested in them. And I know my path was made smoother because it was forged by a mentor who embodied mother work praxis through mentoring. We can think about mother work through the curriculum. It was a Black feminism course that I took in graduate school, right? That really introduced me to Black feminist thought. And so, in many ways, this entry into what we know as Black women's studies was so critical to my own intellectual development and curiosity, because mother work is about helping our children see themselves. And I saw myself in the curriculum through Black women's studies. And so there was something special about a curriculum designed to help me see Black women. It was something special to have the care of Black women teachers and faculty who were making concerted efforts to help me, and who continue to help children see themselves in the curriculum. I think mother work can also operate in response to Black death. I'm doubtful we would know the names of Gwen Carr or Samaria Rice or Sabrina Fulton, Leslie McSpadden, Tamika Palmer, were it not for their children who were subjected to untimely deaths in the midst of state-sanctioned violence. And so these mothers are considered, mothers of the Black Lives Matter movement, and were thrust into the spotlight in an ongoing effort to keep the names and the memories of their children alive. And what I think is really telling is that they're all doing this, right? Despite everything that they've endured, they are still able to exhibit joy, and they're still committed to telling the stories of their children and the work of saving other people's children. Mother work can show up as joy. So I like what Kelly Carter Jackson refers to when she refers to Black joy as a remedy and the ultimate enactment of our humanity. She talks about Black joy as a refusal and a balm of resistance. And Black joy can be a warm embrace. It can feel like a play date. It can be expressed toward children. It could be remembering joyful memories, particularly of children that we've lost. It can be lots of things, right? But joy is the thing that makes us forget, even if momentarily, that white supremacy and anti-Blackness even exists. So when we engage in Black feminist mother work, we get to build a different future that doesn't have to be dictated by external forces intent on pain and suffering. Mother work is also storytelling and remembering. And, there is a public intellectual, Nia Bates. She's featured in Clint Smith's book, How the Word is Passed. And she talks about going during childhood, going on a school field trip to a plantation, and how, when the tour guide closed the door, what she saw were, pictures on the window, right? And she saw pictures of her grandmother. She saw pictures of her mother. She saw pictures of her aunt. And one of the things she says is, oh my God, that's my grandma. Next to my grandmother was my aunt. There were other members of my family on that wall. And I started thinking about, like, I've always had an awareness that they worked at these places, but I hadn't connected it to the academic history of plantations. And so this is the thing that, made her ask, are they aware of how are people aware of how my family, my mother, the women in my family helped shape the history, right? But they're not talked about. And so her story is significant because it really captures the importance of historical context and bringing knowledge into full view. And more importantly, she gets to tell her story through a larger project devoted to restoring, right? And what I hope you all gather from Naya is that there's power in storytelling, right? And seeing photos of her grandmother and mother and aunts who had already been there, who had already been engaged in mother work. And so she's telling her story through public engagement as a public historian. And through mother work and storytelling, we get to exercise the power to place Black mothers' lives and experiences at the center of the conversation. And we get to create and establish spaces where the stories of mothers and their Black children matter, right? Even in her own reflections of mother work, Emily Bernard talks about the stories her mother passed to her. She says, quote, I carry the trove of my mother's stories inside of me like an organ. I adorn myself with them like jewels or thorns on a crown. Stories of her rage, pain, and bewilderment over what she had witnessed and experienced as a Black girl growing up in the Jim Crow South. Because she was a skilled narrator, I felt my mother's stories as much as heard them. Now I tell them myself because they are interesting, because I can't resist stories that can be felt as well as heard, and because I feel a need, both obligation and urge to keep them alive. So we too have to tell stories and pass the word to Black children, but also allow them the flexibility to create new stories, and stories where Blackness isn't an inherent space of oppression or sadness, but instead one of joy, agency, voice, and expansiveness. So I reference these examples, right? Because if we are to think about Black women and by extension, Black mothers as possibilities, then we have to imagine their lives to better understand, or reimagine their lives to better understand what's at stake when we subject them to impossibility. So I would be remiss, and I'm wrapping up. There are a couple of considerations to think about with regard to Black feminisms and mother work. The first consideration is this idea of mammying versus mothering, right? So often Black women are mammified rather than acknowledged and honored as mothers, and mammification looks like unrealistic expectations placed on Black women to extend their labor without recognition. It occurs in homes when we work full-time jobs, but are still expected to be the primary caregivers of children and extended family members without support. And it looks like the systemic failure of pay equity, right? The second caution is around co-opting Black feminism versus advancing it, right? And this is, my push or encouragement to tread carefully between advancing Black feminism and co-opting it as a model for how we care for Black women and Black children. I think it's really important to be inspired by Black feminism and to incorporate the ideas of Black feminism into how we think about Black women, and ultimately how we love and care for Black children. But advancing Black feminism looks like privileging the knowledges Black women produce to move us towards solutions that elevate Black children and communities, right? You don't need to be a mother in the traditional biological sense to love Black children, and you don't have to be a Black woman to use Black feminism as a point of inspiration to love and care for Black children. But it is possible, right? Shirley Chisholm had no children, but she engaged in heavy other mothering if you read her biography. I also think if we think about this whole idea of mothering and expanding it and appreciating it, we can refer to Audre Lorde, who in Sister Outsider talks about, she says, as a Black lesbian mother in an interracial marriage, there was usually some part of me guaranteed to offend everybody's comfortable prejudices of who I should be. That is how I learned that if I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. And so there's this tendency to limit what Black mothering and romantic relationships can or should look like. And when they don't meet our expectations, we resolve to dismissing and shaming what we deem unfamiliar. This last idea or caution is around celebrating versus shaming. So we can forge a path toward greater possibility by moving beyond this idea of first, right? I think it's fascinating that in 2024, we're still thinking about the first Black woman to do this. And I've experienced that, but I recognize that many of these accomplishments are a form of institutional shame management, right? If I remain the first and only, or when it takes several decades for there to be a second Black woman. And so we live in a society that shames Black women, right? We've seen it through the Moynihan report, right? We've seen it through so many different avenues, right? And so celebration is reserved as a way to balance all the ways shame has been affixed to Black women's plight, particularly in the process of mothering. And I think it's a vicious cycle that, if we aren't careful, becomes the expectation of Black girls to reproduce and participate in the same cycle. Lastly, we think about positioning Black women and solidifying them as possibility mothers. I'm sorry, possibility models when it comes to mother work. So, in her book, The Three Mothers, Anna Malika Tubbs centers the lives of Alberta King, who's the mom of Martin Luther King Jr., Burtis Baldwin, the mother of James Baldwin, and Louise Little, the mother of Malcolm X. And she talks about their role in shaping the nation. But she expresses how these women haven't just been ignored, but they've been ignored differently. They have, been forgotten in history when it's easy for them to see. And so she eloquently conveys through her book and profiles that, these mothers are significant and they model possibilities for their sons to be change agents. And it's the same thing me and Shayla Haynes talk about in our work about Black women being possibility models. And so my goal here today really is to illuminate contributions and the plight of Black mothering through a Black feminist lens. And if you take nothing else away from this talk, it should be this: that Black women and Black mothers are already doing the work of caring for Black children, but we have to start considering who is taking care of us and what are the supports that allow us to engage in mother work. So I will stop there and thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you this morning.
Ooh. So you said, oh, I'm gonna give you as much as I can. And you gave us a whole chapter 2 lit review. Like, ma'am, ma'am, you just gave us chapter 2 in real life. Like you the reading that just comes so effortlessly. It's hard I know people want to record, but you got to take notes. Like, just come and you got to take notes because there's so much that you gave, so much richness. But what I want to appreciate you most in your talk is just centering my experience, right? Sometimes we come into these spaces and we don't show up anywhere, right? We don't show up as a focus, as a place of investigation, a site of curiosity. And here you have positioned Black women, Black mothers like me in that space. And I just appreciate you for that so much, and bringing your mom and your sisters into this space. This is what CBCE looks like. It's like family. So I just appreciate you coming authentically, but then also with the brilliance. Like, oh, I was like, okay, I wish we recorded because I need for myself. But I was just taking notes as fast as I can. This was awesome. I didn't see any questions. That it always, like, you do leave the CBCE full like church, and you just had a whole sermon. And your slides were beautiful. I mean, just amazing. But I think you're right. I think you said it two different ways. We are the model. And I think you said something like people don't want to be like us. I think everybody wants to be like us.
They want to be like the things we do.
They don't want to be the work.
Right. They don't want to be the work. There you go.
But the end, because we look like you, shiny, melanated, right? We came in cocoa butter moisturized. Like we look like we ain't been through anything. Everybody wants that, right? They just don't want the struggle.
Don't want the struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the struggle makes us actually the most beautiful. And then if we could do it together, the one thing I kept thinking as you were talking is, how do Black women outwardly support? Like, I feel like there's a group of Black women leaders that has not been formed. I feel like that. Like,
while I was preparing this talk, I had a chance to sort of, revisit some of the work, the Black Women's Club movement. And I mean, there was a time where Black women were creating all kinds of organizations and spaces just to do the work and to do it collectively. And I would love to see that. I'm trying to work with, some Black women right now, in different capacities. Some of you all may have heard of the SOS Collective, but I mean, there
Mhm.
are different ways I've tried to, I just think it's important. It is really a matter of helping other Black women know how to plug in. That I
Yeah.
think that's the bottom line, and helping them to know how to, contribute. Like, I think there's so much we can share about Black mothering. I am in a Zoom call or in a conversation with my friend Shayla and others who are Black mothers or engaging in Black mother work, and we're giving advice on all the things just to sustain one another. Right? It's not necessarily about our children, but girl, how you doing?
Yeah.
Like, I'm having this issue. I have a question about my child. What can I do? And so we come into the conversation already knowing that our sister is doing the best she can with her child, or with the children in her classroom or the students in her any of those things. But it's, how are you doing?
Yeah.
How are you thinking about this? How are you making it through? How, what support do you need from me? And that question is not asked often enough.
Never.
It's just not. That there's the
Mm.
assumption y'all come in and do this work and don't complain.
Yeah. And be glad you made it here. Honestly, be glad you're here. Be grateful. So SOS came at the time that I needed it the most, actually. And I kind of feel like that space with people who, like you just said, have women who need to come together just to decompress, but then also to strategize.
Mm-hmm.
I think we haven't gotten to the strategy piece, which I feel like the playbook is always the same, and we keep getting beaten. Like, I don't understand.
I know that should have been something in place. I wish there had been something in place when, Claudine Gay
Yes,
was going through her situation at Harvard. I
yes,
wish there had been something in place when we saw these Black women, presidents dying. Like, I just
yes.
wish, and again, I think we all have our sister circles and enclaves, but if there could have been a more national movement around this, that would have, it could have possibly made the difference.
Yes.
I don't
And
know.
and let's be clear, we are the mammies and the mules, and they depend on us. So for everything. But in this election season, for example, in the state that I'm in, Black women are the most sought after voting bloc because we're the most consistent. We always vote Democrat, right? And so these allegiances, there's a strategy for making people pay for the allegiance, pay for our greatness.
Yep.
And we just haven't gotten a national, and we've done this before for other people, right? We haven't just honed in and exclusively thought, no, we're gonna go out for Black women. We've never done that.
Mhm.
Always very selfless. I think it's time.
It is. It's long overdue.
I agree. I agree. Well, let me know. I'll be I'll be by the river. Let me
Okay.
know. I'll bring the s'mores. Just let me know when you want to make it happen, because I'm we're so powerful in so many ways. We shouldn't be getting caught flat-footed, and we certainly shouldn't be isolated.
Mhm.
And that's what your talk and your work with SOS. I mean, you're just amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, thank
And I just
you.
appreciate you all for, I felt like I couldn't do it without saying something about my mother. I couldn't. So, um, and for those of you who came in at the beginning and heard The Makings of You, that was one of my mother's favorite songs. My father would tell her that song reminded him of her. And so that was why that was playing.
Oh, that's sweet. And I thank you for coming on the Shield. I know you don't have a lot of time. You at the Universal Studios with the kids, you come in on two wheels and you make it happen on the Shield on the strength of Black folks. And I just appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank y'all.
I do see one. I don't know how much time we have. I do see
You can
one
take your
question.
time. Oh, wait, you
Okay.
got a couple of questions came in. Okay.
So I see that. Oh, wait a minute. I took notes. So this from an anonymous attorney. I took notes to use to formulate my public testimony regarding this matter. Who else to lead and make decisions regarding Black children, even Black folk participate in the public debasing of Black women? Is the question who? I'm not sure what the question is. Who? I'm not sure. I'm not even going to try to rephrase it. I do agree that sometimes Black people can be complicit in our own oppression. I can acknowledge that. And when I'm seeing that, I'm doing my best to address it. My best advice is to not be silent about it.
What about this question? Can you share a bit more about what it looks like to explore Black women as possibility models? And how do you do that without co-opting Black women feminism?
I've seen it happen. Like, I think it's possible to look at some of the concepts that stem from Black feminism. Like, there was a time when I was early in my career and I wanted to do an NSF grant. I couldn't use the word intersectionality. Now it's all up in, funding opportunities, right? And so something has happened, right? There's a popularization of some of the concepts. I think we have to be very mindful of citation politics, because it's possible to begin to talk about intersectionality and love and joy and all these other things, and then forget about Black women, right? Forget about how we theorized, how we talked about love, how we, talked about all of these pieces. And so citational politics is important. So any organization that is doing something and, they're getting ideas and using them for strategy, and they're getting ideas from Black feminism, you need to say that. Like, you need to, at the starting point, the ideas for our strategy really stem from an appreciation of these Black feminist ideas. You like, say the women's names, right? And people don't do that. They just put the strategy together and put it out there. Like, Black feminists wasn't at the forefront of the ideas that you got in the first place. So I think citing, naming, Black feminist intellectuals is really important. And, I love, Patricia Hill Collins' work, when she talks, everybody ain't fit. So when you're borrowing or being inspired by Black feminist ideas, you don't, I feel like I'm going to repeat myself, but you don't take the ideas, you don't cosplay Black women, right? You don't try to talk like us, or, you don't do those things. And I think that's what some people think when they're, referring to Black feminist language, right? When I say girl, it's very different than a white woman getting in front, calling me girlfriend. You don't do that. So there is a way and appreciation. If you don't fully understand it, don't use it, is what I'll say. But I think using Black feminist framings requires study. I don't know everything about Black feminism, but for everything I do, I go and read. And so my encouragement is for people where this resonates with something they want to do with their organization or their program or their classroom, any of that, you can do that. But you need to read. It's not, Lori said this in the presentation. So, read. When I read that quote about Audre Lorde, like, I don't think people realize that that's connected to her being a lesbian mother, right? Everybody used that quote about I would, be crumbled up, you know what I'm saying? But that comes from her tapping into her own identity as a Black woman, lesbian in an interracial relationship, right? So you got to understand. I think there's context is really important and why Black feminists have written the works that they've written. So that's how I think it becomes a possibility. That it has to be about honoring and centering them first, why they're saying what they're saying.
Which makes me think it's not possible, because what you're saying is you can't be below basic. You can't be mediocre, right? You got to have some excellence about yourself. I just don't think that I think they want to put on a Black woman suit and move on with their life. Like, I don't think
And I
what
hate
you're
that.
talking about, this excellence in scholarship. Yeah. So
We're not a costume. We're not, any of those things. It takes work. Again, I when I put up that slide and I said all of these little contours of Black feminism, they look easy. They look like they make sense, right? Easy to do, manageable. But then, when people get into the work, they want to run away. But if you, want to use Black feminism, you gotta tap into the work and the labor that comes along with that.
Yeah. And it goes back to, they want us, they don't want the work though. Yeah. So I don't know.
Want the rhythm, but not our blues.
How about that? How about that? The one question about advocating for Black women superintendents, I think we were talking about women in leadership, Black women in leadership particularly, right? But if you have any more thoughts about that. She was speaking about superintendents specifically.
How do we support Black women superintendents?
And advocate for them?
Is there any I'm not heavy into the K-12 space or leadership space in terms of organizations aside from UCEA, but is there like is there an organization for Black women superintendents? I know there's not a lot of us, but is there some sort of organization that exists?
No.
So I think there should be. There's a model out there for how this might look. Stephanie Evans started, her and a few other women started a group focusing on Black women department chairs. And people think you don't need that kind of support as a Black women department chair, but you do. They got a whole book about it and they meet, but I think there needs to be a space, and a space can be as simple as creating a Zoom room and inviting people in, right? Emailing them, say, we're going to come together and we're going to talk. I think sometimes, and I'm one of them, Black women can be a team doing too much, right? Let's not overthink it. We can come together. We can create a Zoom space. We can create a text thread. We can pull a space together at a conference or whatever to begin to think about, what this space needs to look like and what are our needs. It's the start of a conversation, but don't do it alone, because that's where the work gets hard and it sort of, tapers off. I believe Black women superintendents, just like Black women department chairs, Black women presidents, Black mothers, we need to identify others who can relate to that struggle and provide the space. It's as simple. It's as simple as that, at least initially, to come together and have the conversation, and we can do that.
It's great advice. I think those are all the questions. You kind of hit back on the theorizing, right? You said you need to read, so
that's what it is. I love theory, right? I love to look at a situation and think, like, why is that happening like that, and what are the contours of that, and how might we use this to, help people make sense of it. And so that I think there's just real value in theory. and we get to create language and concepts that help articulate, what we're seeing and experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm checking the chat to make sure.
Oh, I haven't even gone to the chat.
Oh, there's a lot of thank yous, right? You do speak in this way that is accessible, right? And so although these are high level ideas and sophisticated theories, right? Black feminist theory is pretty sophisticated. They're saying that you've made it in your delivery of your talk, you've made it accessible. So there's a lot of that,
Yeah.
a lot of exceptional. I'm going to save the chat for you.
Okay.
But lots of thanks. And I would echo all of those comments. This has been fantastic. And I appreciate you so much for making time to come and talk with us. And I'm hoping you'll come and talk with us again. We have a free conference in the summer that runs a week. We're thinking of other ways of bringing young Black folks who are thinking about Black folks in research and they're in graduate programs to Detroit to convene, and we need people like you to come in and talk with them. So
I would love to, but please do invite me. I want to be in affirming spaces, and I want to support you and everything that you all are doing. So,
thank you.
hi, Dr.
Thank you.
Murtada.
Oh, there's so many of your people in here. Lots of people from Columbus.
Yes, how are my Columbus folks?
This is awesome. Oh, he said the email's already ready. Okay, good. Dr. B's got your little invite for the next situation coming. So thank you.
And if it's helpful, I don't, share the PowerPoint, but when I am talking, because I'm using, sources and I'm inspired by them, I'm happy to, shoot you a list if people
Okay.
want it. I don't know. It's just a list of people
That's perfect.
that I've mentioned.
That's perfect. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. You've gone above and beyond, and we appreciate you. They say, yes, a list. Count me in. Okay, we could get that done. Oh, listen to these folks. Can we get a list of books too? It is free college now. That's what this is. It's free college. I am grateful too. Thank you so much, Doc. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. What are you about to close us out with some more song, Dr. B?
Listen, I was getting emotional at the beginning.
You held it together though.
I did. I feel like my voice is shaking.
You held it together.
Thank you all for being here.
This is beautiful. Thank you for sharing your family with us.